The topic today is land, soil, water, natural vegetation and wildlife resources, Geography class 8. In the previous chapter we studied about different kind of resources. Now in this chapter we are specifically going to study about the natural resources. First of all, we should define what is a natural resource. A natural resource is a resource which is directly derived from nature. Now nature gives us many kind of resources, like the topic itself says, land, soil, water, vegetation, wildlife. All these resources which are provided by nature are then defined under the definition of natural resources. Now to begin the chapter with, we are going to study all these resources one by one. So let's start with the first resource, land. Now to talk about land here, what is land? Land is the surface or the ground where we stand, where all the vegetation grows, where all the wildlife stays. So land describes us as a very important source provided by the nature. Now as we are all aware that on our earth, more than 70% of the portion is covered with water, and only 30% of the area is land. Now from this 30% area of the land, from this 30% land areas, 90% of world's population occupies roughly 30%, and the rest 70% is sparsely inhabited by 10% population. For example, like areas where it is very hard to live on, mountain areas like where we have dense forest, where like we have desert areas where it is not easy to survive. There people usually do not prefer to live. So only 30% of the land is occupied by 90% of the population. The rest 10% is sparsely inhabited. Because of the different living conditions, people usually do not prefer to live in areas where the facilities are not available or where it is difficult to survive. So areas like Antarctica, Africa, forests of South America, etc. are regions where life is not so easy. So people do not prefer to live in these regions. So that is why the 30% land out of the 30% total land available on the earth is inhabited by people. That is, the people live in this region. Now this distribution of land is we can see that very uneven. Now there are regions like the subtropical regions or the mid-latitude zones where most of the population lives, because there is the presence of arable land, there is presence of water. So people usually live in these areas. Whereas as we move further to the latitudinal regions, the people or the population, we can say, decreases with the increase in the number of the latitude, because as we move up the temperature falls down and it gets extreme to live in these regions. So moving on is the land use pattern. The next heading here. In this land use pattern, I would like to show you a table which can give you an idea how land is used in different countries in different areas. Here we are taking example of 3 countries, India, America and Japan. Now as you can see in this table that when we come to India, we see that 50% of the land is engaged in cropping or agricultural activities, 4% in pastures, 22% in forest and 17% for other uses. Now if we come to the different countries like Japan, the number of forests occupying the land area is 67, which is far more in comparison to India. Now then again we have the comparison with American countries, that they have 21% area engaged in agriculture, 26% area engaged in pastures and 32% of their area in forest. Now these differences occur because of different conditions prevailing in these countries also. Now if we talk about Japan, we all know that the land area in Japan is very less, but still they have evolved the technology that they are encouraging the spread of plantation, and they are encouraging the forest area in these regions. If we talk about America, it already has a very wide amount of land area, so it can, plus the population here is very less, so it can divide, the division here we can see is almost even. But when we talk about India here, the division is kind of uneven. We have the pasture land of only 4% here, but on the contrary, we have the highest population of cattle in our country also, which is then again dependent on this 4% of pasture land only. Also, the forest area, which is supposed to be 25%, is less, and it is only 22%. So here we can see that the land use pattern in different areas is very different. And these differences occur because of different conditions prevailing in the country, and different speed of development of these countries. Now, in the land use pattern, we can also add about how the land use has changed from the past to the present condition. Now, in the earlier period, the land was basically used for agriculture only, and the land was divided in private land and community land. Private land was land which was owned by a person, and community land was the land which was owned by the whole community. Now, with the development, with the increase in population, the number of community land started decreasing because the demand of the people started rising, and to fulfill that demand, people started occupying the areas in the community land. So slowly and gradually the community land started decreasing, and also with the increase of the demand, the intensity of the use of the land also increased, and urban areas started evolving up, and rural areas started going down, but still the basic requirements were filled by the rural areas only. And today the vast changes in the land use pattern also reflect the cultural changes in our society. With the excess use of land, we have found a lot of effects or the adverse effects on land also. Now, what are the adverse effects that the land is facing here because of the excess use? The distribution of land is here uneven, so the use could not be done in a proper manner. If the distribution is even, then we can say that the use can be in a very proper manner. But here the distribution of land into different uses is very uneven, so this uneven distribution is causing a lot of adverse effect on the use of land only. Now here we are emphasizing on building up more factories, roads, and commercial things, whereas we should be where we are using the rich land, or we can say the fertile land, for these purposes, which is not beneficial for land also. Now, land, because of fixed resource, it is not going to increase or it is not going to decrease. Now, what is required here is that we should be using land in a very proper manner. Also, because of this uneven distribution, there are other problems like shortage of cropland, soil erosion, degradation of land because of excess use of pesticides and fertilizers. So these are the adverse effects that the land is facing because of uneven, or we can say improper utilization. Now what will be the consequences of this uneven, or we can say disturbed use of land? Now, as a consequence, we can say that the quality of land will decrease. Also, we'll see that the nature is going to show its adverse effects in the form of landslides, and the quality of the soil is going to degrade. So all these adverse effects are ultimately going to affect the human beings only. So what is required here, that with the limited availability of land, we should be using it in a proper manner, and utilizing all its capability to its extent, and not spoiling its quality. Now, moving on to the other natural resource is soil. Soil is a very important resource, as we all know, that because soil provides us all the vegetation which are required by human beings, and it also is called mother. The soil is termed as mother because it gives us it fulfills all our requirements. Now, the soil is closely linked to land. Landforms usually determine what will be the quality, or the type of the soil is going to be. Now, first of all, we are going to study The definition of soil. A thin layer of grainy substance covering the surface of the earth is called, or it's termed as, soil. Now soil is made up of organic matter. That is, it contains humus plus minerals and weathered rocks or grainy particles of rocks and stones. Now in the formation of soil, a lot of factors determine or affect the quality or the type of the soil. First of all, here about the soil, we are going to study about what are the major factors that affect soil formation. We can explain this topic with the help of a chart. The first factor that affects the formation of soil is the parent rock. As we all know that soil comes out from weathering of rocks only, and the type of the rock determines what will be the type of the soil will be. If the rock suppose is igneous in formation, so it will produce black soil, and suppose if the rock is shale, then it will produce clay. If the rock is sandstone, then it will produce sandy grains. So the condition or the type of the parent rock, it determines the color, texture, mineral contents and chemical properties of soil. The second factor that affects formation of soil is the relief. Relief here is referred as the soil which we are talking about as present at what altitude, at what height, or in what region, or what topography is found in that region. If it is plain, it is plateau, it is mountain areas, mountain, then again at what height we are talking about of the soil. So all these factors, all these relief features, they affect the quality of the soil or the type of the soil. If suppose we are talking about soil in plain region, so the soil will be eroded or weathered a lot of time by the wind and we can say river or different sources. But if the soil is found in mountain region, it is usually grainy or it is rocky with hard texture. So the relief also then decides what will be the condition or what will be the type of this soil. The next factor that affects the formation of soil is the climate. The climate is a very important factor because in the climate we count temperature, rainfall, these kind of climatical activities which affect the weathering and erosion of the soil. Now if suppose in there is a region where there is a lot of rainfall, then the soil will be termed to a lot of weathering and it will be usually very clayey or we can say बहुत चिकनी मिट्टी होगी उस region में. But if there is a region where there is very high temperature and very low rainfall, then in that region we'll usually find sandy soil, like we can take the example of Rajasthan. The next factor that affects the formation of soil is flora, fauna and microorganism, or in a single word we can say the humus which is present in the soil. The amount of humus present in the soil will decide the fertility of the soil. The more the amount of humus will give more arability to the soil, and then the soil will be more fertile. And the last factor is time. Of course, time is a very important factor. As we all know that it takes a lot of time in the formation of soil, and for forming a very thin layer of soil, it takes a lot of millions and millions of years. So the older the soil will be, then we'll find more of the qualities in that soil also. So time plays a very important factor in the determination of thickness of the soil and the quality of the soil. Now, as we studied in land also, that land is degraded because of its excess use. The same condition is happening with soil here. Soil is a very important part of land. Of course, it is found on land only. So, because of excess use of soil, or we can say wrong use of soil, the soil is also getting degraded or getting low in quality. Now, the degradation of soil is happening because of many activities. The first is, as we studied in land also, excess use of fertilizers and pesticides is giving bad, we can say it is giving, is not adding to the fertility to the land, or it is degrading the quality of the land. Also, the erosional work of nature and human activities also is also degrading the condition of the soil. By nature, the erosion is done due to rainfall. Most of the soil or the upper layer of the soil is washed off from the surface and has washed into the water bodies. And once the soil has reached the water bodies and the bottom of the water bodies, it is of no use for us. And also, human activities, we can say that because of excess irrigation, the soil tends to get flowed out from the farm areas, and the most fertile, the top layer, it gets eroded. Now, next factor of degradation here is deforestation. Deforestation, as we all know, because of excess cutting of trees in the forest, the soil is getting loose, and because there are no trees to hold the soil is getting eroded due to different sources of nature. Also, salinization of the soil, that is the salt content of the soil is increasing because of over irrigation. The water we are giving to the crops or in the farms is salinized, and it is degrading the quality of the land. So this is how we can say that the degradation of soil is happening. Now, what is required here is conservation of soil. For soil conservation, the first and foremost thing that needs to be done is, of course, afforestation, that is planting more and more plants. Also, the conservation of soil in different region can be done with different methods also. Here we are going to show you what will be the different methods in different region. First, we'll talk here about in hilly areas. In hilly regions, the first method that can be used is shifting agriculture, that is moving farms after their usage to different areas. Intercropping is mixing different kind of crops in one farm. It gives a more hold to the soil. Terrace farming, that is growing of crops on level steps constructed on hilly sides. We can show this like this also, that suppose it is a hilly region, so we can grow crops in little steps like which is easier to irrigate and use. Contour plowing is plowing with the contours of the hill only. This again can be shown with a diagram. Instead of plowing this way against the slope, we should plow the land like this, so that it is easier to firstly plow the land and then hold the crop, and it will also facilitate in irrigation also. Contour barriers and rock dams. In this contour farming, we can also add rocks as forming a man-made barrier to hold the water or irrigation which is done by human beings, to lead to degradation of or flowing of the soil away from the mountain region or the farm or the area. So when we are doing irrigation in this region, these rock dams will hold the soil and will not allow it to flow out. The next is in plain region. In plain region, methods that can be used is, first, strip cropping, that is using or planting different crops on parallel narrow strips. It will help in holding the soil, and it will also give lesser space to the soil to get eroded. When we have plants or crops growing at such close distances, then there will be less space for soil to get eroded by the mediums of water and wind. wind again. The second method that can be used in plain areas is binding of fields. That is, if we provide a boundary to the fields, then there will be less possibility that the soil which is inside the boundary is going to get eroded. Whereas if we have open fields without any boundaries, and these boundaries can be natural also, made of wood or other things, then if we have a boundaries in the fields, then these boundaries will hold the soil and will not allow it to get eroded from that area or from that field. The next method here is mulching. In the method of mulching, the bare ground between plant is covered with a layer of organic matter like straw, or sometimes we also use gunny bags which are full of straw or humus or soil, which is then kept in the gap between the plants. So when we are putting this straw or these gunny bags in that gap, they hold or they put a pressure on the soil, and they do not allow the soil to get eroded. Later on, this straw gets degraded in the soil only, and it provides fertility to the soil. So this mulching method is also very interesting, and it also helps in stopping the degradation of the soil. And in the last is coastal and arid regions. In coastal and arid region, rows of trees are planted which are known as shelter belts to protect the soil from getting eroded. Because these trees they are planted in this region, they also are planted in the direction from where the people know that the wind is going to blow, or the wind usually blows. So the trees are planted against the wind route so that the erosion can be stopped.